On today's podcast, we're going to spend part of our time focusing on linebacker play with one of the game's most experienced at that, and he's known for coaching linebackers, but did an outstanding job as a head football coach at Illinois, Edinboro, Indiana University of Pennsylvania, and we're really excited to have him here, and that's Coach Lou Tepper. Coach, it's great to have you here on the podcast.
Keith, it's great to be with you too, and I look forward, even at 75 years of age, I look forward to being around people who love the game. And in fact, I'm still involved with two local high schools here and a junior college here. I work with the Fellowship of Christian Athletes, and I'm on their practice fields often. And so it's a good combination. I get to talk about football, and I get to talk about my faith at the same time.
Yeah, it's fun when you get to that stage too, where you miss the competition of it, but at the end of the day, now you go out to the field, you do your thing. Certainly, you're invested in it and want to win all the time, but the pressure is off you as far as your name being in the headlines and in the paper.
Absolutely, I hear you.
Well, Coach, we're going to get into linebacker play here a little bit, which is going to be your topic at the Illinois High School Football Coaches Association Clinic. It's the first clinic of the offseason, of course, with everything going on here. It's a virtual clinic, December 8th through 12th, over 120 speakers, yourself, including and headlined by Coach Mike Loxley of Maryland and Coach Pat Fitzgerald of Northwestern. I think we have 120 speakers in total there, so we're really excited about that and excited to have you there. But before we get into the linebacker play, I know a lot about you here, having been a high school coach in the area. You guys did recruit my high school. In fact, and before we got going, I said, the guy who would come in and talk to us, it was Mike Yersich, who now is at Texas as the offensive coordinator.
Yes, I've been blessed in the 48 years. I've been blessed to have a great group of linebackers. I had over 20 NFL linebackers, and I actually had 4 who won the Butkus Award as the best linebacker in the country. And but I also had a tremendous staff. And Mike Yersich was my quarterback coach when I was at Edinboro. Sean Payton was my quarterback coach at the University of Illinois. And at Illinois, it was interesting because nearly all my coaches went on to coach in the NFL and coach a long time. And when I got fired after being there for nine years at Illinois, I said, hey, it had to be me because the staff I had was incredible. But we loved our time at Illinois, and in my 48 years, for my family, for my children, Champaign was their home, and all my kids went through high school there. My daughter actually went to school there, went to college there, and so it's a wonderful place, and we have fond memories of our time as a lineman.
Okay, so prior to that 48 years, you played at Rutgers, and somewhere along the line, there came this idea to get into the coaching profession. For you, when did that happen?
I actually have a small plaque on my wall. It's a handwritten letter that I wrote to my then girlfriend, now wife. And it's really interesting, Keith. My high school counselor told me that he would send me to one of the state schools, IUP or Edinboro or what have you, if I wanted to be a coach. But if I wanted to be an engineer, then he would permit me. Now, he had no power to do this, but I didn't know it. He would permit me to entertain the bigger schools. And of course, Rutgers was one of those. Penn was one of those, Cornell, if I went in engineering. So I chose to go into engineering only because I could then go to Rutgers. And I was there for a semester. I did well academically. and I took my transcript back to my counselor, and I said, "Hey, I've done my duty. I'm going into coaching." So I knew I wanted to be a coach from early on. While I was at Rutgers, I had a coach by the name of Dewey King, who was my defensive coordinator. Dewey is still alive today, lives in Waukesha, Wisconsin. I'm 75, he's 95. And no single man has influenced me more than Dewey King other than my father. And Dewey was a defensive coordinator, and then later in life, a head coach. I was the same. Dewey adopted 2 children. I did as well. Dewey wrote 2 books. I did as well. I mean, his influence on me was incredible, particularly in my faith. He actually lived the life of a Christian coach. He was hard-nosed. He was tough, and yet everybody loved him because he was fair. And so, yeah, that's where I got a lot of my inspiration. I wanted to be able to influence young people the way Dewey King influenced me.
Coach, as you got into your career, and you did have, as you mentioned, a lot of great influences. What really became part of your coaching philosophy? Because I think we always learn from those guys who are mentors, but eventually you got to be yourself and kind of take things that work for you. So for you, what was the coaching philosophy that really helped you develop throughout your career?
As a head coach for 16 years, I always stressed at my staff that football was an influential tool, and that you could use it for harm. You can actually harm kids by using, just like a hammer. It can be used for good and bad. But the positives you can influence with football, and we all know, we've all been there and know how much we want to play the game. And because we want to play the game so much, we're willing to do the things the coaches tell us to do, whether it's academically or socially or on the field. And you may remember Bruce Smith. Bruce was the first guy I had, who was the first guy taken in the draft when I was at Virginia Tech. And Bruce came back, and I asked him about the difference between the NFL and college football. And he said, "Coach Tepp, I used to sit on the edge of my seat and listen to every word that the Virginia Tech defensive coaches told us." He said, it was so important to me to hear what you said and to adhere to that, because I wanted to play and I wanted to be a great player. He said the difference for me, and this is not for everyone, and he told me this, but the difference for me in the NFL is that my assistant coach sits on the edge of his seat and listens to me. Because if we get into a fight, he's leaving, I'm not. And therein lies, and I don't want to paint a bad picture for the NFL at all. Khalil Mack is one of my guys. Mm-hmm. And I don't want to paint a bad picture that Khalil Mack could make his assistant coach sit on the edge of his seat. I don't mean that at all. But there is a different dynamic between high school coaching, college coaching, as opposed to the NFL. And the NFL is business. High school and college coaching, I believe, as much as winning is important, it's values. We've got to use this great gift that God has given us in college and high school football to improve the lives of young people. And particularly today, I'm working here at a small single-A high school, Greene County High School, and 71% of them don't have fathers in the home. And so we're one of the few males that can influence these young people in their lives. And I've always stressed it with my staffs that, is winning important? Sure. We don't keep our jobs if we don't win. But more importantly, and particularly when you're now at 75, the wins and losses, while my record was for 16 years was really good, it pales in comparison to the texts and the calls and the emails that I get from former players.
Coach, in your career too, you spent a lot of time as a defensive coordinator, and I know for the Illini, I think you were known for your 3-4 defense. Was 3-4 pretty much what you utilized throughout your career?
No, it's not. I became a heretic. I loved the 3-4. I loved it. And, the things we did, we were one of the best defenses in the Big Ten in the 9 years I was there. But as the game changed, it was probably around 2002. And I had an assistant coach who is very well known across the country, Chris Kosh. Chris was my defensive coordinator. He worked for Lou Holtz. He was told when he went to, I think it was South Carolina with Lou after he left me, that Lou wanted him to look at what Mississippi State was doing, and they were in 3-3. And he wanted to combine the 3-3 and our 3-4. And that's a very easy combination. Mm-hmm. And so he implored me to try that. We did in 2002. We put it in. In 2003, we used it only against 10 personnel, 11 personnel, and 20 personnel. And we were using it about 65% of the time. And in 2003, we finished first in the nation in total defense, first in rushing defense, and first in scoring defense of about 152 schools. And by 2000, I'm not sure of the exact year, but yes, I am. It was 2011. We went totally to the 3-3. I had been asked to help coach to be the defensive coordinator for Team USA, and it's an every 4-year project. It was only the second time ever. 2007 was the first year. We did it in 2011. We did win the gold medal, and we played in Austria. But the problem was we had essentially a spring practice. We had about 14 practices to get ready to play 4 games in Europe. And we had to choose, are we going to use our 3-4 package or our 3-3 package? We couldn't do both. Mm-hmm. And so my secondary coach, Steve Bernstein, who was with me for about 20 years, Steve said, hey, I'd rather go with the 3-3 because the coverage schemes are pretty static. There's not a lot of adjustments to them. And so that's what we did. But the problem was we were playing Germany in, I think, our second game. And Germany was like Wisconsin. They had 300-pound linemen, and they were muscled up. They were 21 personnel, 22 personnel, 12 personnel. And so we adjusted for the first time the 3-3 to those packages and had great success. And I came out after that, and we never turned back. We stayed in the 3-3 from that point on. But I love both packages. If Keith, if you were the head coach and you said, hey, Tep, I want to hire you, but I want you to use the old 3-4, I got no problems with that. It's good. I would say, though, that the 3-3 against today's offense, which is so made up of spread looks with 10 personnel, 11 personnel, the 3-3 does adjust to it more easily.
Well, Coach, I'm interested in your 12 and 21 personnel adjustments. I know with what we would do when I was at BW, we faced a couple 3-3 teams, was a lot more of that 12 and 21 type of personnel to give them a little bit of the problems. I mean, it is built and is very good against some spread offenses. So I think what I'm seeing just today, I was watching a clinic with Sonny Dykes, right? He's an air raid coach, and about halfway through his clinic, he starts talking about 12 and 21, and if you have a tight end and fullbacks, fullbacks plural in your offense, it's an advantage for you today because defenses have been built to stop the spread offense. And I think you can remember, Coach, like years ago, the first page of many defensive playbooks was just drawn up against, pro set I formation, right? 21 personnel. And that's everything based out of it, where today I see a lot of playbooks basing out of 10 personnel versus 2x2.
Absolutely. 2x2, 3x1. That's and empty. Those are the looks. But you're right. And the adjustments. I was. In fact, they had asked me, whether I would speak on linebacker play or the 3-3, and I said, hey, it's up to you. And so they asked me to speak on linebacker play, which I thoroughly enjoy. But I did. I've gone around to a lot of colleges. I went to Iowa State. Iowa State put in the 3-3, and they kind of revolutionized the Big 12. And they've had tremendous success. And I was out there for 2 days because they had no background in the 3-3, but their head coach had just said, hey, here are your best 11 players. I don't care what you do, but I want these guys on the field. And there were only 3 linemen. And so that was their decision to go to the 3-3, and they brought me in, and I'm not taking credit for what they're doing because they've done a great job. But I got to speak to them. I did the same thing at VMI, at Delaware. And so I think there are some unique things, particularly against, I don't know what you call it, but the divider offense, 11 personnel with the tight ends in the backfield, or at the line. I think the 3-3, honestly, I think the 3-3 kills that package better than any scheme I've seen. And then you need to be able to adjust to because anybody who's any good in the 3-3 against the 10, 11, 20 personnel, the first thing you're going to get is 21, 22, 12. And I feel comfortable with the adjustments to each of those now.
Yeah, that's definitely it. And, we were multiple at BW, and really what we would do was it was kind of a pseudo 22. So I would line up, we were pistol, and I'd have the fullback next to the quarterback and, tailbacks behind him. We got a tight end on the line of scrimmage, an inline tight end. And then what we did, we had kind of he was a kid who the next year he started at tight end for us, but he was one of those receivers who was growing out of being a receiver. Big, flanker type of guy was our Z. Mm-hmm. And the entire game, we either lined him up as like a tight slot away from the tight end, or we would motion him over to that position right there and essentially become 22. And, we wanted to make sure you were, spreading out to defend those gaps. So we were able to get some of the combinations we wanted to be able to run the ball inside. So when you look at facing, let's start with 12 personnel. I know some people will look at, okay, we've got a couple tight ends. We'll use 12 personnel. It's one of the first things I think people would do to a 3-4 as well, is to get into a 2-tight formation, 12 personnel, and try to create more gaps for you to fill. So in the 3-3, what kind of things are you going to do to adjust against that?
Well, one of the things that I think, even before you get there, one of the other things that happens with 3-3 teams, muscling up is one way that people go, and another thing is to go 3-by-1,
right?
Because a lot, and one of the different things, Keith, about the 3-3, if you go to a 4-3 team, from a 4-3 team on the East Coast to a 4-3 team on the West Coast, there is so much similarity. That's not true with 3-3 teams. 3-3 teams are really different, and they adjust differently. But a lot of 3-3 teams, I'd say maybe the majority of them, when they get to a 3-by-1, they slide their linebackers so they become they lose their stacks.
Yep.
And they actually become a 30 team. We did not want to give up our stacks. I think one of the great things about the 3-3 is the nose and middle linebacker stack, because now you as an offensive coach, if you're gonna reach or scoop that, then you've got to cut down your split to reach to that nose guard. You can't have a 3-foot split and reach that and cut the nose guard off.
No.
You with me?
Yep.
And so and it's amazing now, even at the highest levels, we would study teams, and very often you could tell the direction of the play by the split of the guard.
Yeah.
And so we always gave our nose guard the right that if he had a small split, that he could slant to the big split. All he had to do was tell the Mike backer. But regardless, whenever that stack is there and you scoop it, the nose guard is going to have the backside A, and the Mike is going to have the front side A. And now we would bring the Mike, and again, each team is different. Some Mikes shuffle. We would bring the Mike hard to the front side A to make sure that center got off the nose guard in a hurry. If he didn't, we had a run through.
Yep.
And so that stack was really important to us, and we wanted to keep that stack even against 3-by-1s, and we wanted to keep that stack even with 12. So if you just lined up in 12 personnel with 2 tight ends balanced and 2 wide receivers, then we had, and maybe this may take too long to go through, but we would flip our personnel much exactly like we did in our 3-4, because we came out of the 3-4 to the 3-3. And so in our 3-4, we had a 3 technique and a rush linebacker who worked together. So at Illinois, it was Simeon Rice was the rush linebacker. And then we had a 3 technique. And all our 3 linebackers were all different. They weren't mirrored. There are a lot of 3-3s, in fact, maybe most of them, that are mirror linebackers. The 2 outside stack linebackers are exactly the same. The 2 tackles or ends are exactly the same. That wasn't true for us. So we would have a rush linebacker, and his rule was simply this, because he lined up to what most people would call a 4-eye, right? And so if there were no tight end, he played what we called a hip technique, and he would play about 4-by-2 outside the tackle, and he would key the offensive tackle.
Mm-hmm.
So that was one technique. If there were a tight end there, he walked up on the line of scrimmage and played what we called a 7. Most people could call a 9 technique. But his gifts were that he was an outstanding pass rusher. Simeon Rice, Khalil Mack, go all the way back to Colorado. We had in fact, we had a guy who was a first-round draft choice, that rush backer. He was important to us because he was a great pass rusher, and he would dominate a tight end one-on-one. And so the 2 positions he played were either off the line to an open end or over a tight end to a tight end, right? And then inside him was a 4 technique. So the 4 technique had the B gap. The nose and the Mike had the A gaps. Over on the other side, we had a 5 technique, who now, if it were one receiver over there, let's say it were a pro I, he would stay in the 5. But if there were two receivers over there, like you have with two tight ends and two wideouts, then our other outside backer would come up and play over the tight end, and that end would go into a 4 technique. So we would have 2 4 eyes. And you'll see that at Iowa State a lot. Yes. They play a lot of 2 4 eyes.
They do.
Right? So now the stack stays inside, and the stack outside now, we would play quarters, and we would have a free safety over the C gap, he and the tight end to the rush backer, and we would have what we call the drop linebacker, who is kind of the weak safety on the other side, do the same thing over the tight end to the other linebacker. So if you lined up with 2 tight ends, we lined up with 8 people. Mm-hmm. And so we never wanted to be outnumbered, but we also didn't want to give up our stacks.
Right.
And so that's kind of the philosophy that we had, and there were a number of different coverages that we used. In fact, against that set, 2 tight ends and 2 wideouts. You know, for a lot of teams we played, you know, you could predict that's an inside zone, outside zone, bootleg formation, and for a lot of teams they would block everybody up and throw to the 2 wideouts. You know, we faced that against Ohio University. They had a great offense, and they would just challenge you with these 2 great wideouts. And so what we did against them was, rather than playing zone, we manned up the free safety and the drop on the tight ends they were over. We manned up the Mike on the single back, and then we doubled the single receivers. We put 2 over number 1 on one side, and the outside linebacker over the tight end on pass would run and man up on number 1 to his side for slants, hitches, and try to get under the outs. Mm-hmm. But that was a coverage that we used against teams that wanted to block everybody up and throw to the 2 wideouts.
Yeah. I've got a lot of follow-up questions there, Coach, as you've talked about some things, and I think things worth talking about. So, first of all, using the personnel the way you did, right, where most teams have the exact same guy, you guys had different ones. Now we ran, and this is when I coached at the high school level. Our defensive coordinator at the time went and learned the stunt 4-3 from George Perlis at Michigan State. And so that was, the defense I really used growing up as a coach.
Yeah. When I was there, Michigan State, Illinois had to be the bloodiest defensive games you would ever want to see. And normally the scores were 10-7, 14 to 10. I mean, we were arguably the 2 best defenses in the league. So I had a lot of respect for what George did.
Now, what we did, though, we started seeing more of that, of the spread teams. And so our our package for that became almost what you described. And, personnel, it was already kind of personnel, the stunt 4-3. You don't have the same guys on either side. And so that was our answer, and we went into that, and more with, like you said, the 4 and 4 eyes within that package. But in looking at that, there's a couple things you said that you weren't going to unstack. I know when we would play a stacked team, the first thing my offensive line coach wanted to figure out was, could he unstack the stacks? Right? For him, that was a key, that he really didn't want to face those stacks, and we were able to. Against some teams, they would do that. What's your recommendation for that? I guess why do teams do that, and is there an advantage in staying in it?
Well, I think again, if you just did a canvas of 3-3 teams, I do believe that at least 70% would unstack to a 3-by-1. And if you're in a heavy pass down, like when we got into our dime package and it was 3rd and 12, I don't have an issue with that. But in a rundown, we were really stubborn simply because we knew the stack, and we did not want to give that up to the running game. And the offensive line coaches that I work with, they're the same way. We go through spring practice and we would go through. One of the funny things was because in spring practice it's really competitive, and you don't want to let on things. But that was one of the first places that we started to work and let the nose guards make a check to the guard splits out of the stack. And so the offensive line coach came to me and asked me, "How are you doing this?" And I said, "Hey, I am excited to tell you right after spring practice." And then finally the head coach, who was an offensive guy, came to me and said, "Hey, Tep, you got to let us know what's going on here. What are we doing that's tipping off?" And you never think of a guard split. You're thinking we're doing something with the backfield set or the formation or what have you. And so we just made a small cut up and said, "Hey, here's the deal. Even my dumb nose guard can figure this out."
Yeah, we like to do the same thing with our splits. I have to admit that you would see those things, and whether it was against even or odd teams, that there definitely were some keys in what we were doing with our splits. But at the same time, I don't know that it takes some study, right? And then making sure your players can actually see it. That's a different thing too.
Right. And I'll tell you, you mentioned that one of the things, and it took me a few years. I didn't do this all 16 years of my career, but I would get a former offensive line coach or a former offensive line player, and on Sundays when we came in, and of course we're studying the opponent heavily, but his entire duty was to study the offensive line stances and splits of every player. Mm-hmm. And because he could spend an entire 2 days doing just that, I would say that every third week we came up with something that either by split or by stance that gave away something for us. And I can remember Khalil Mack was playing then, and there was I won't say his name or his team, but he was an NFL prospect. He was a 6'6", 320-pound left tackle. And we never, as we watched the film, as closely as we watch film, we don't have as much time to study stances as we do schemes. And what this guy found was that he was always in a 2-point stance. And when his feet were exactly parallel, it was probably 95% run. But when his left foot turned out, and it wasn't even at a 45-degree angle, it was just slight, that it was almost 100% pass. And so we trained all week because we found out about it. If coaches had found out, we probably wouldn't have found out until Thursday. But this guy identified it immediately for us. It was in the game plan immediately. And so when Khalil Mack was over this guy and his stance was such, he would just call out a name of an animal, cougar, lion, meaning it's a run, man. And if we happened to be in a pass call, he would get us to a run call. And by the same token, if his foot was out, he would point to the sky, which would tell the secondary it's a pass, and then he would give us a pass rush. And the very first series, it was a rundown. I forget whether it was second down or whatever. Khalil calls it. He knows it's a pass on a rundown, and you've seen Khalil play, but he took his left hand, put it in the chest of a 6'6", 320-pound guy, picked him off the ground, and sacked the quarterback with him. Now, he was an absolute terror as a pass rusher, but he would not have been able to do that had he not had that pre-snap key.
Yes.
And so that's something I've recommended to head coaches ever since. And I've often given them examples of what this guy would write up. Every player, he would write up their stances and things about them. But then every third week, there would be an alarm. We got something,
Right.
And
I love that recommendation, Coach. And, obviously everybody maybe doesn't have that single guy they could dedicate to it. But I know what we would do when I was at BW, our offensive line coach, and then our defensive coordinator was the defensive line coach. Those guys would, as they were going over film, and especially as we got mid to late season and, they've studied the other side and we're seeing a different opponent, they'd always, share that information. So if our offensive line coach saw some tip-offs as he's watching, an offensive line and looking at protections and things like that, he'd make a note of it and pass it along. And, so I think there's some ways you could do it, but those tip-offs, and I mean, not that, Khalil Mack needs any kind of help, but wow, you give him that information, he's unstoppable.
And the other thing, we were always able to find some just volunteer. We never paid any of these guys.
Yeah.
But they just loved to do it, and it was like a day and a half work.
Right.
And they would love to come in, a guy like me. Hey, bring me in for a day and a half, and I get my football fix. And if I can find something for you, but it's not a 7-day-a-week job.
Yeah.
But I think the key is, can you get the information to your team soon enough that you can change your game plan with it? And if you have it done by in college, if you have it done for a Tuesday practice, you're good to go.
Yeah.
But if you don't have it until Thursday, now it becomes a recommendation.
Right.
Hey, watch for this. This may help you to know whether it's run or pass, but you're not changing a call,
right,
based on it.
Right. Well, Coach, I think we could go on forever here about schema. I'll have to have you back on to talk some more about that at another time. We did tell our listeners we would get into linebacker play a little bit here and at least give a little bit of an overview of what you're going to be speaking about at the Illinois High School Football Coaches Association Clinic. So, just looking at your linebackers, and we know you've played in both of those defenses, or I'm sorry, coached in both of those defenses, the 3-4 and the 4-3. But for you, just starting with looking at the player, the attributes that you want to see in a linebacker, what are some of the key things you look for?
Yeah, Keith, before, and I've written 2 books on this.
Yeah.
In 1997, it was complete linebacking. You may remember Kevin Hardy, who was the second guy taken in the draft and played 10 years. And it became the best-selling linebacker book in history. And then they asked me to do a second edition when I had Khalil Mack. And I did that, and there were new things because there was new technology between 1997 and 2014. Plus, I had transitioned to the 3-3, and there were chapters on the 3-3 there and linebacker play. So that came out in 2014. But really, I think the the basic is, regardless of scheme, there are 4 requirements of a linebacker. If a linebacker can do these 4 things, it doesn't matter what scheme you're in, he can be effective. And if he can't do these 4 things, he can't be effective. And number one, and the most misunderstood by far, it's incredible to me, is taking on a blocker. So I have an entire chapter on taking on a blocker, and I will speak in great detail about, we call it hit and shed, about taking on a blocker. Second is pursuit, getting from the blocker to the ball carrier. Third is tackling. And then the fourth is coverage skills. And so those 4, if you can do those 4 again, you can be effective. And where I differ from so many is that 3 of them, pursuit, tackling, and coverage skills, have very little to do with size. Mm-hmm. You could be a 5'10", 170-pound high school linebacker, and you can pursue. You can tackle, and you can have coverage skills. And we make a mistake, I believe, in feeling that we got to have big guys because of hit and shed, taking on blockers.
Right.
And this is where I spend the most time teaching. It's where I spend the most time instructing coaches, that the hit and shed has much more to do with the feet than it has to do with size. And this is where I demonstrate this, I've had as big as 400-pound guys, and I'm 180, that I have turned like a top because of the hit and shed. And so I believe that movement is the key. I played largely with undersized linebackers. Of the 20 plus NFL linebackers I had, most of them were very much undersized when they went into the NFL. Even Khalil Mack, I mean, he's huge now, but he was not that way when, he was recruited at 210 pounds, and he was not that size when he came to us. The important things was, could he pursue? Could he tackle? Did he have coverage skills? And then my job was not only to teach those 3 things, but to teach the hit and shed. Now, in terms of identifying linebackers, if you just said, hey, here are 20 athletes on my team, how do I test to find the linebacker? There are 4 things I would test for. One, I would test the 40-yard dash. Not that the 40-yard dash is the end all by any means, but it is something that we all understand, and it's important for the next test. So I would test somebody in their 40 time, and then the next I would test in the pro agility. And when we started this, it wasn't called the pro agility back when I began this. We called this the jingle jangle. In fact, in the first book, it's called the jingle jangle. In the second book, it's called the pro agility. But essentially what we do is we would take the 40-yard dash time and subtract from it the shuttle time or the pro agility time. And if there were a 0.5 or better, then that guy has the kind of change of direction to be a linebacker. And I can give you tons of examples, but one of the greatest, I had Barry Remington at the University of Colorado, and Barry was it was back then in the Big 8. Barry was an all Big 8 linebacker. He was about 6'4", maybe the biggest linebacker I'd ever had at that time. And Barry was 6'4", probably 225. And he went to the NFL Combine and he ran with the 40 linebackers who were there. He ran the slowest time in the 40. He ran a 5.1 40-yard dash. And then they ran him into pro agility, and of the 40, he was the third fastest. At that time, he ran a 4.3, and so there were 0.8 of a second difference between his 40 and his shuttle time. And his change of direction, despite his 40 time, his change of direction was incredible. And interestingly enough, he played with another guy who was a 100-meter champ in California, and he played linebacker. And his 40-yard time was way faster than Barry's. His shuttle time was worse, and the difference between his 40 and his shuttle was 0.2. And he was just more mechanical. Mm-hmm. He was fast. He was a track guy, but he was just more mechanical. So the 40-yard dash and the shuttle time are two that would run. The other is the power clean or hang clean. And of all the lifts, this took me a little while, Keith, but my first 4 NFL players came from when I was at William & Mary. And I had all the testing of all the things they did. And the one thing that they were best in was the power clean. And so I started to put together, you know what? The power clean is the hip roll. The power clean, when you get to the hit and shed, because these were all undersized guys, when you get to the hit and shed, it's setting a base, and then it's exploding with your hips. And so the power clean became a very important lift for us, because power is meaningless unless you can apply it. And so the power that you either have naturally or that you gain through the weight room, if you now can set your base so that you can apply the power, then you're powerful. If you have power but you can't apply it, you don't have any power. You can be the greatest power cleaner in America, but if you can't apply it, it does you no good. And I have a career of undersized guys who can apply their power. And then the fourth, which is very important to me, was body fat. And the muddy water in body fat is, through the years, there have been so many different ways of testing it that we used to, when we first began, we did it with skin calipers. But I can just tell you that body fat tells me generally, if the body fat were between 10 and 15%, I knew that guy could play for 70 plays hard. If the body fat were close to 20% or over 20%, he was always going to let you down. He was not going to be able to play hard the entire game. And in fact, it's in my first and second book. I had a linebacker by the name of Derek Brownlow, who I love to death, and I talked to with some regularity. And Derek Brownlow, when I came, was a sophomore, but he had started as a true freshman as a special teams guy and somewhat player, but he was 5'9", 248 pounds. And so he walks in, and of course he's not anything like I like to look at. And so one of my first conversations with him was, hey, here are the things you have to do to be a great linebacker. And the lean body is important. And he said, Coach, you don't understand. This isn't the Big 8. This is the Big 10. And we're facing 300-pound guys, and I've got to be big to take these 300-pound guys on. So essentially, I did not convince him, but he got down to 224, and I don't think he liked me for it. And Derek Brownlow was all Big Ten as a sophomore. He was the player of the year in the Big Ten as a junior or senior, I forget which, and he finished second in the Butkus Award. He was drafted at 5'9", 224. He was drafted in the 5th round, and he played 6 years in the NFL. And the time that he came to me, there was a ball that was thrown, I think it was a curl, and he took off. All of our kids, when the ball was thrown, it's so easy for defensive linemen and linebackers to stand and watch it, right? And we forced them to turn and sprint. And he turned and sprinted. The ball was tipped in the air, and he spread out and intercepted the ball downfield about 15 yards. And he came to the sideline and he said, "Coach Tepp, I know what you mean now." He was convinced. And, much the same happened with Khalil Mack. Khalil, while he was never overweight, it just wasn't in his chemistry to rush the passer and turn and run. I mean, you do that and you make a play like once out of every 20 plays. Well, what's the use for it? And so it was not second nature to him, nor is it to most players. But we forced it on him, and we were playing Pittsburgh, and they completed a screen pass on the other side from the side he was rushing. And he turned and sprinted. He ran 42 yards down the field, tackled him, and they ended up kicking a field goal rather than what would have been a clear touchdown. And I think that was a light bulb moment for him, that he knew, that this is going to make me a better player. So, but those would be the 4 things. I would test them in a 40-yard dash. I would compare it to their shuttle time to see if they had the COD that we'd like to have. I would test them in the power clean to see if they had the power that we could apply, and then test their body fat to see that they could play hard for the entire game.
Coach, when you looked at the other parts of linebackers and the makeup you'd want to see, the intangibles, right? Intangibles for any position. There's a certain thing we want out of our players. So what were the intangibles that you'd look for in a linebacker?
Yeah, there's, certainly enthusiasm and leadership. Enthusiasm is contagious, and we used to use an old Dale Carnegie quote that was, "Act enthusiastic and you'll be enthusiastic." And it's amazing how true that is. I didn't believe it when I first did it, but if you get your guys together and just have them clap their hands together, do something that acts enthusiastic, they will become enthusiastic. And that is one of the most important issues for them. But certainly their desire to be great, their intensity, and their desire to work hard. If you love what you're doing and you have a passion for what you're doing, you'll become much better than just your ability alone. But there's no question that the leadership role is thrust on the linebackers, much like they are on the quarterback and on offense. And one of the things I dislike about the spread offense is the fact that it essentially took away the huddle.
Right.
From the defense, and that was a great movement by the offense, because the huddle gave you a chance not only to communicate your call, but to communicate enthusiasm, to get kids excited about what was happening next. And when you practice to play Baylor back in the day, and the play was every 14 seconds, I want to tell you, man, you lose a lot of the on the field enthusiasm and communication. Now you can regain a good portion of that on the sideline, but it's not the same as it once was.
Well, Coach, I know there's a lot more you're going to share here, and a lot will be on video as well in your clinic with the Illinois high school coaches. We're definitely looking forward to that. One question I always like to end with, Coach, is I took it from the title of Bill Walsh's book. So, in your 48 years and all the things you did, what's the one thing that you did as a coach, could be on or off the field, that you felt really gave your team the winning edge?
I might bend this a little bit because I think other than the players and their responses and their development, which was the most important thing, and this is for today's day and age, I think it was the things we did at Illinois for racial harmony. And I'm so sad to see where we're headed in a country right now. But I can tell you this, why Illinois was really unique is that we were almost exactly 50-50 white and black. And so when I came in, I saw on one side of the team room, mostly blacks, on one side of the team room, mostly whites. And I said, this is not right. We're going to get this fixed. And so here were the things we did, and I would challenge coaches at every level to do the same, because whether you're white or black, God has made each and every one of us in his image, Genesis 1:27. There is no one that is better than another. And if we give the time to each other to get to know each other, we will love each other. So here's what we did to stress that point. In all of our team meetings, we had a seating chart. And because we were 50-50, if you were black, you had a white guy most likely on either side of you. If you were white, you had a black guy on either side of you. So in all of our team meetings throughout the year, for 4 years, for 5 years, if you're going to speak to somebody, you're going to speak to somebody of a different race. When I housed you, we housed interracially. And, when I recruited kids, I told them, this is the way it is, man. If you do not want a room with somebody of the opposite race, don't come here. And so we housed our white players with black players and vice versa. When we ate, we had a dinner meal together every night. You could eat with whomever you wanted to, but on Thursday night was unity night. And on Thursday night, you ate with somebody that you didn't know very well, and I would dismiss the tables by the ones that were most integrated. And it became kind of fun. A guy would raise his hand and say, "Hey, coach, we got 2 blacks, 2 whites, and we got a kicker." And so it was those kind of things that we did to bring our team together. And we, in fall camp, we read literature to them, that pointed along those lines, so that racially we became closer. We would have, black players speak, white players speak, and our kids got to know each other, and we got to love each other. And we actually won a Martin Luther King Award, and we Paul Simon, if you remember Senator Simon, he actually put a Wall Street Journal article in the Congressional Record of the things that we did. But to me, that is using football as a tool. Did it have anything to do with winning? Yeah, I think it probably did. But we used it as a tool to make us better. And I know in fact, Scott Weaver, one of our quarterbacks, put on a couple months ago an interview we had done by Chris Fowler. They didn't have game day back then, but it was a national game at Ohio State, and actually ran I don't know how long the segment was, whether it was 5 or 10 minutes, on what we had done and what it meant to the players. And he sent it out and just said, "Hey guys, we're in times right now where racial harmony is not going real well, and just remember the kind of things that we live for." And I'd say that was maybe one of the most significant things in my career.
Coach, great stuff. Thank you for sharing that. Definitely, I think, important for us at this time, and probably, it always has been, but I think, just with what we've been going through, I'm glad you shared that story.
Yeah, thank you.
Coach, I appreciate your time. Really looking forward to seeing your clinic. For our coaches out there, again, that's go to ihsfca.coachesclinic.com to register for the clinic. It's an incredible lineup, including Coach Tepper. And Coach Tepp, would love to have you back sometime to talk more ball. We left a lot on the table today. We got to get back together and talk some ball again.
All right, sounds good, Keith. I appreciate what you do.
Thank you again for listening to the Coaching Coordinator Podcast. Please, if you are enjoying the podcast, head over to iTunes or Spotify and click 5-star for rate. If you have a minute, write a review. It really helps the podcast. Check out our new home for the Coaching Coordinator Podcast. That's at coachandcoordinator.com. And follow me on Twitter at Coach K. Grabowski.